Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Laura Henriksen. I'm the Director of Learning and Community Engagement at the Poetry Project. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all, and such an honor to welcome the brilliant Layli Long Soldier to the Poetry Project. Before I turn it over to Layli, I just have a few reminders and updates. Tonight's moderator, the wonderful Corey Hutchinson, is adding a link to the chat now with some helpful Zoom tips and best practices. Please note that we are recording tonight's event. You are welcome to have your cameras on or off as you prefer, but just keep in mind that if you have your camera on, it's possible that your little tile will be included in the archived video. I also want to note it's possible to access a live transcript of tonight's event by clicking that red live link in the top left corner and selecting View Stream, which will open the transcript in another browser window. If you have any Zoom questions or run into any difficulties, please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone with staff after their name, and we'll be glad to help. So too, if you experience or notice any maliciousness in the chat, please reach out to anyone on staff so that we can work to resolve that right away. We're very grateful to you for joining us in the ongoing effort to build and nurture safer spaces where we can listen and learn together. Corey is now adding to the chat a link to our statement of safer spaces. Whenever we gather, sharing our time, even if not our physical space, we remain committed to building with you all an environment that challenges and resists ongoing structures of hierarchy and harm. If this event were taking place in our usual venue, we would be gathered together now in St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, where we have hosted events for more than 50 years. St. Mark's Church was built over the site where Peter Stuyvesant constructed his family chapel in 1660. Stuyvesant enslaved 40 people, and in his time as Director General of New Netherlands, increased the population of enslaved Africans in the colony, whose stolen lives and labor were used to construct the buildings and streets on this stolen land. St. Mark's Church is located on the unceded homeland of the Lenape people, Lenape-Hoking. I am speaking to you tonight from what is called Sunset Park in Brooklyn, which is the unceded homeland of the Canarsie, a Munsee-speaking band of Lenape people, a neighborhood whose waterfront was redlined in the 1930s, a waterfront that is now the site of Municipal Detention Center, a federal prison where 1,600 people are currently experiencing incarceration. As we gather across various neighborhoods and states, it gives me occasion to remember that it's not just some of the land that was stolen, or some of the land that needs to be returned, but all of it. It reminds me too that to return the land is not a matter of transferring capitalist ownership, but as many Indigenous thinkers have taught us, a radical rethinking of ownership and belonging, centering Indigenous autonomy and active relationality and responsibility. To reiterate Gloria Anzaldua's assertion, this land was Lenape-Hoking always and is and will be again. Corey is putting a link to a map in the chat now, not to endorse it as complete, but to invite you to join us in learning continually about the land we occupy, its history and its ties as a path towards deeper accountability. Thank you for reflecting on this with me. I'm so honored now to introduce Layli Long Soldier. As a reminder, we're super lucky because Layli has agreed to have a conversation following her lecture. As questions occur to you, please chat them directly to my colleague Roberto, who you'll notice has Q&A after his name. We'll be collecting your questions throughout the event, and we'll get to as many of them as possible following the lecture. One thing for which I am already grateful in Long Soldier's framing of tonight's gathering, "Where did I go wrong?" is the way this phrase puts the error, the mistake, or misstep in a state of movement, an event or passage that is both spatially and temporally located, even as that location remains unfixed, a question. For me, reading Long Soldier's incredible work, there is always this delicate balance between movement and stillness, fullness and absence, every moment, all at once. In Long Soldier's writing, text appears as an animate, living thing, requiring active participation from the reader. This is true both in her poems that spider out gracefully, searchingly as a mind and thought, and also in the documents and records her poems engage with, such as state apologies she picks apart and finds as empty as the treaties they apologize for ignoring. Text here is never flat, never static, but living and living variously. I find in Long Soldier's crucial book, whereas this mode of writing is a way of thinking, as an act of relating, a way to move through time to the present moment and to keep with you everything that carried you there, love, hurt, relief, failure, and also everything that is ahead. I'm so excited to turn it over now to Layli Long Soldier to guide us in thinking of limitation as yet another way to move.
Hi, good evening. It's me. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone, for your kind welcome here with you tonight. I wish that I could be there, or I wish I could be with all of you in person, but I'm also grateful that we can still get together in this platform as well, in this way. Before I get into too much, I do want to apologize ahead of time. I'm a little bit awkward, socially awkward, and socially awkward on Zoom, especially. So I'm going to do my best, but just try to hang in there with me. And just for tonight, I made a PowerPoint, so that's going to help me with my awkwardness, I'm hoping. Layli, Akichita Hanska, Layli Long Soldier, Machiapi, Daya Hipi Nachante Washte, Nabe Chiyuzapi. And I said, I come here with a good heart, or yeah, a good heart and a warm hand or something like that. I really wanted to thank all of you for being here. And tonight's presentation, Where Did I Go Wrong, is actually exciting and fun for me. I think it's nice sometimes to talk about our failures and ways in which we learn from our failures, our mistakes. And I don't know if I consider them mistakes always, but I think as sort of stepping stones, you know, and progression. And I think especially during the pandemic, I feel like a lot of us, me and many people I know, we've had time alone. We've been learning how to be gentle with other people under the difficult circumstances and the stresses that we're all under. And part of that adjustment has also been to become gentle and compassionate to myself as well. And to realize that I am just a person and I'm learning and changing and growing all the time. And sometimes we can look at things and almost celebrate them. We can see our change, our evolution as writers and as artists. So I'm going to share a few things. I'm going to do share screen right now. And I hope this works. Okay. I'm assuming you guys can see that. And I'm going to do, let's see, slideshow. Let's give that a try. Okay. My talk tonight, where did I go wrong? The overarching idea is, and the idea of failure or mistakes I've made or things I look back on and I feel like I would have done better, but I don't think I could have. I couldn't have done better at that time because that's who I was then. That's where I was at. That's sort of the stage that I was working in. So I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but that's the overarching idea. And just for all of us to kind of maybe spend some time thinking about some of that, but also more specifically, My talk tonight is going to focus on language, using native language in work that is English dominant, in poems where English is the dominant language, and ways in which I have used Lakota language and some of that progression over the years. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing before I begin too. I want to really make it clear, as Laura said, this is about movement. It's fluid. There's no black and white. I am not setting out rules that pertain to everyone. I think there's so much room for all kinds of work, especially incorporating our languages, our heritage languages. So I just present this as my own personal journey and ways that I have moved and progressed. So I really don't want any of you to feel like this is set in stone as rules that apply to everyone. In my book, I started off with a quote from Arthur Z. No word has any special hierarchy over any other. And that was really an entryway. It was important to me. That idea, as I entered into the work, into the poems of Whereas, Arthur was really influential when I was younger in undergrad. I studied with Arthur Z. And I actually took this quote from class notes. I was going through an old notebook. And so this isn't published anywhere, but I had that quote in quotation marks in my notes. And whenever I did that, whenever I was taking notes and I had quotation marks, I knew that it was word for word, the best I could write it down. And so when I wanted to publish Whereas, I asked Arthur's permission and made sure that I had written it down correctly. And he said, that sounds about right. So he gave me permission. But in the context of the class, which was a deep image class, what Arthur was trying to impress upon us is that in the poem, there is no particular word that, as it says, has any special hierarchy over any other, any greater value. So the word sacred, for example, has no more special place or value or merit as the word, let's say, trash, or the word plastic bottle, or the words plastic bottle. So, but what is important is how it's used, the context in which it's used. And so that really, I remember at the time, as in the beginning of my studies, really influenced me and opened me up to using even Lakota language and seeing that as just as valuable as English on the page. So this is from Whereas. I'm presenting a number of pieces from Whereas, which some of you may recognize as examples tonight. This is a piece that I called a dictionary poem, and this is one of my earliest pieces using Lakota language, and it's titled Wakalapi, which means coffee in Lakota language. Well, it's what we refer to as coffee. There's actually a number of ways of saying coffee. I've also heard Pejuta Sapa, which means black medicine, and so on. But it's not a beverage that is indigenous to the plains. So we have different ways of referring to it. And so I love Wakalapi, and so it's something that I really and I love coffee. It is my favorite drink. So as a young writer, it was just, in a way, it started off just having fun. but it sort of propelled me into this process of working with our language. So I'll read it really quick here. Wakalapi, a word commonly used for coffee, formally meaning anything that is boiled, as in to boil the white collars, to boil the binding in desire to loosen, as in the day as it blows will boil stiff trees, as in the boiling blood, what was not soft traces away through muscle to face, as in the muscle that is boiled away from the gristle, as in the pot with the white collars and gristle, as in a boiling pot over which you are bent, you are watching, as in it will stir in your head as roots of a tree, as in the tree beneath which you left something buried, as it preferred to be buried than the fury of boiling, or the rabbit they caught, the rabbit they boiled, as in the rabbit that came nightly, the jaw of your yard, as in the dinner you ate, the rabbit bone gnawed, as in the boiling blood you never do see, as in oleanders grown over a chain link fence, where roots of a tree and oleander mix, boiled and boiled in a stew, the collars and rabbits and forts in a tree, as in the rabbit in a cage outside in the sun, as in the heat as it boiled the rabbit was dead, as in the checks and bank statements mama boiled in the kitchen, as in the riddance of debt, a ceremony, a boiling, as in money was numbers we would eat and not waste, as in 2 rabbits you remember boiled that summer, one that was caught, the other helpless in black fur, your black pet rabbit you forgot to move to the shade, as in you cried in your room, child, how could you forget? As in the shade that was grace, that was oleander waves, as in the bubbles in water, what comes from this boiling, as in something so light, now bloodless beneath. What I learned from this process is that the slippage, the space or gap between languages, between Lakota and English language, is the space of possibility, and therefore the ground, just fertile ground for poetry. That it's that gap. And that's what I slid into when I confronted this idea of coffee and something that is boiled, the translation between the two. And so I mean, that was really exciting for me at the time. And it just moved me in a whole new direction. I have a friend, a colleague. At one time, he was like, oh, well, he still is. I would say he's still a mentor. A poet named James Thomas Stevens. He's currently faculty at the Institute of American Indian Arts, poetry faculty. And he wrote an essay on the use of native languages in poetry that, and he actually addressed the piece that I just read. And this is what he wrote. And I want to apologize ahead of time. I don't have the correct pronunciation for the Mohawk language, the words in here, but I'll do my best. One of the first words he wrote in this essay, one of the first words I learned in Mohawk was akosa tens. I wish James was here, which means horse. Sometimes a horse is not a horse, rather one moves atop its back. That's what it means. Of course, this was a strange and wonderful thing to see, a human traveling by animal. The poetic possibilities were endless. At the Institute of American Indian Arts, I was introduced to the works of poets such as Meme Bersenbrugge, Clark Coolidge, and the poet that would make me decide, yes, this is what I want to do, Michael Palmer. They were my early influences, coupled with the poetic possibilities of multi-layered kanin kaha words. Again, I apologize to my Mohawk friends. Using the translations from Mohawk felt pleasingly subversive. Readers were reading English, but the images they were taking in were Mohawk without their knowing it. In the poem, Layli Long Soldier uses a dictionary format, which by the second entry moves the reader to an entirely different set of imagery, but one that the original Lakota allows for. The reader feels as if he is waking from reverie, having experienced memory while staring into a steaming cup of coffee, a memory implanted from another's experience and born of a single Lakota word. Each use of a native word or words in a poem intrigues me. The many layers, the many ways of seeing. Each nation recognizes something different in what it sees. Poets are able to incorporate our native languages, are offered the poetic imagery of our ancestors, as well as that of our own lived lives. I think I had a typo, it should be poets who are able, I think. And so this really resonated with me, and that was really sort of the field that I was walking into, the land that I was entering by using words like wakalapi or other exploring other words in our language. In my book, I wrote, this is a quote from one of the Whereas poems. And I wrote, if I'm transformed by language, I am often crouched in footnote or blazing in title. Where in the body do I begin? And I think this really sort of summarizes or encapsulates what I was feeling at the time. It's like, how do I exist? How do I use our language? How do I bring in a kind of sensibility into the work that is integrated and not always in footnote or in a big title, which I myself struggle with, trying to figure that out in the context of an English dominant poem. So I was like, where do I begin? Excuse me. So I have this piece. The first line says, I begin a line about white buttes. So here we are. I wrote a piece titled Wakpanicha, and that is the word for poor in Lakota language. And I was interested in sort of exploring this idea of being poor or poverty, which is something that is often associated with our people, our homelands, our nations, you know. And I was really interested in questioning what what it means to be, what it really means to be poor, to be impoverished. I may not read this whole piece, but I'll start off and with the first few stanzas. I begin a line about white buttes that bend chiseled faces and click stone eyelids at night, but abandon it. Instead, I push my love into this world and mail you a summer letter. From mailbox to door, you read the commas aloud. I become a wife of bottled water, comma, black liner at the lash, comma, and sleeves to the wrist. These weeks alone, 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 comma, I pull my body to a table of empty chairs. And sometimes I cannot stop the impulse to command. Alone, alone, I instruct, sit down, comma, eat up, comma, and I write in detail to hush and echo, comma, the rupture of a fault line. I want to write about Wachpanicha, a word translated into English as poor, comma, which means more precisely to be destitute, to have nothing of one's own. But tonight I cannot bring myself to swing a worn hammer at poverty, to pound the conditions of that slow frustration. So I ask, what else is there to hear? A comma instructs me to divide a sentence, to pause. The comma orders a sequence of elements. The comma is caesura itself. The comma interrupts me with quiet. And so I move through the piece and sort of explore all the things around poverty and wealth, what it is to have something of one's own and to not have something, not to have anything. And towards the end of the piece, it focuses on family, on language itself. And at the end of the piece, I come to this. And I also couldn't ignore the fact that money is a part of poverty, even though I think that we should not base our sense of wealth on money. It is an important factor in understanding poverty. Nonetheless, I came to the end of the piece and it says, nevertheless, I dig through my pockets, dressers, drawers, bookshelves, comma, meticulous picking, comma, because I must write it to see it, comma, how I beg from a dictionary to learn our word for poor, comma, in a language I dare to call my language, comma, who am I? A sweeping chill, my stained mouth, just oil at the surface, comma, because I feel wachpanicha, I feel alone. But this is a spillover translation for how I cannot speak my mind, comma, the metaphrasal ache of being language poor. What I learned, because we don't always plan, most poets I know don't plan the poem out ahead of time. We kind of let it begins to have a life of its own, right? And we start learning from our poems ourselves. Things surface and things come out. And at least for me, I always learn from the piece at the end, and I'm often surprised by what comes out in the last stanza, the last few lines. And what I learned from this piece is I feel poor or most impoverished and disempowered when I cannot speak. I mean, when I am language poor. So that was really sort of a moving point. Now things started to boil, as they say. They started to heat up in this journey I had in working with our language on the page in the English dominant poems. I started thinking about around that time. Then I started thinking about this essay written, you'll see at the bottom, by Simon Ortiz, essay called Song, Poetry, and Language, Expression and Perception, a Statement on Poetics and Language, which was really beautiful. It's really, if I recommend reading the full essay if you can find it. But I'm going to include an excerpt. I'm going to read an excerpt here. Simon Ortiz is originally from Acoma Pueblo, and I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with his work. I hope you are. My father is a small man, he wrote. My father carves dancers usually. What he does is find the motion of deer, buffalo, eagle dancing in the form and substance of wood. I think this is so beautiful. I don't know if any of you have taken sculpture or carving classes, or if any of you are sculptors. But this was one of the most fascinating things I got from taking a sculpture class, is that learning that most often sculptors work with the wood. They don't have a preconceived idea, much like poets. They look at the wood itself and find the shape, the form within it. So his movements are very deliberate. He's writing about his dad. He holds the buffalo dancer in the piece of cottonwood poised on the edge of his knee, and he traces, almost caresses the motion of the dancer's crook of the right elbow. He clears his throat a bit and he sings. And the song comes from that motion of his carving, his sitting, the sinews in his hands and face, and the song itself. His voice in full tones and wealthy, all the variety and nuance of motion in the sounds and phrases of the words are active in it. Recently, I was talking with a friend who is enrolled in a Navajo language course. She is Navajo, but she does not know how to speak Navajo. And I would say also for our Navajo friends, they call themselves Dene as well. This is the story at present with quite a number of Indian young people who use English as the language in which they express themselves. English is the main language in which they experience the meaning and the uses of the language. So this is really important to me. This was really important to me reading this, because it's true. We experience our native, English is our first language, we experience our second language, our native language, through English first. Yeah, so this really got me thinking about the way in which I was thinking and writing in our language, using our language. She made a comment about not being able to easily learn Navajo as a course of instruction. She said, I can't seem to hear the parts of it, referring to the inflections and nuances of spoken sentences and words. Excuse me. I referred to a remark I made sometime before. The way that language is spoken at home, aku, the tribal people and community from whom I come is with a sense of completeness. That is, when a word is spoken, it is spoken as a complete word. There are no separate parts or elements to it. And I meant that word is not spoken in any separate parts, that is, with reference to linguistic structure, technique of diction, nuance of sound, tonal quality, inflection, etc. Words are spoken as complete words. For example, when my father has said a word in speech or song, and I ask him, what does that word break down to? I mean, breaking it down to the syllables of sound or phrases of sound. What do each of the parts mean? And he has looked at me with exasperated, slightly pained expression on his face, wondering what I mean. And he tells me it doesn't break down into anything. Language, when it is regarded not only as expression, but is realized as experience as well, works in and is of that manner. I have a typo there, sorry. Language is perception of experience as well as expression. When the totality is considered, language as experience and expression, it doesn't break down so conveniently, and there is no need to break it down and define its parts. So this really, I had begun my journey with these dictionary poems where I was looking at the parts and the literal translations and finding the space between and so on. It began to, I felt something begin to shift in my relationship to our language, and also in the way that I was working with it creatively. So this one is a piece I'm sharing, and I'm getting so vulnerable here because this is one of the mistakes, the failures that I was most embarrassed of, and yet I'm still grateful for it, because every step along the way I have learned more, and I've learned to treat our language with more care, to talk to others, and to think about the context of our language. So this piece actually is what I have on the screen is what is published in Whereas. But I have an early version, and I don't know where it is. I have an early version of this poem that was published in a journal somewhere. I don't even remember where it was. And I think probably I don't want to remember, because I made a huge mistake. In the original version, the early version of this piece, I had used this word, watuja, or watujaya. And so I'd written this thing about being tired, this piece about being tired as part of the Whereas series. And these pieces are responding to the congressional apology to Native people. So what happens sometimes is, a lot of times, because I'm a learner, I'm always asking family members to help me out with my language, with our language and understanding it. But sometimes I get tired. I also get tired of bothering people. I feel like I don't like going and just asking for information. That's it doesn't always feel right. So in this instance, I thought I would be independent, and I would just use a dictionary. So those were the terms that I found in this older dictionary, and it was published in a magazine or a journal somewhere. But I had this intuition, this little nagging feeling, this voice that said, I don't feel quite right about that, just relying on a dictionary. And I felt like I should call up my dad and ask him if this is correct, if these terms are correct. And so the piece, I'm addressing this idea of this quote from the apology that says, whereas Native peoples and non-Native settlers engaged in numerous armed conflicts in which unfortunately both took innocent lives, including those of women and children. And so then I move into this thing of being tired. I tire of engaging in numerous conflicts, tired of the word both as a woman and a child of that, whereas, and so on. And so it says under the dictionary claims, I look to the dictionary and I find the term watuhaya, or meaning to exhaust somebody or something. For example, to tire a horse by not knowing how to properly handle it. Which I look now and I think that horse is language, and I didn't know how to properly handle it. That's what I got from this piece. So am I watuha or watuhaya? I call my dad to ask and double check my findings. And I asked him, how do I say tired? And he responds, blue ro, which is completely different than what was in the dictionary. He said, if you want to say really tired, it's lila blue ro. I have to get my G, my guttural G. And so he said, this is my family's way, the Oglala way to say tired. And who knows better what tired is than the people, right? So that is really, and then this led to a whole conversation with my father about dictionaries. He asked me, he was like, what dictionary are you using? I said, oh, this old one, I described the cover. And he said, you know what, I bet you anything that language is coming from originally from Dakota. Like, I bet you this person was sort of just sort of transferring it into Lakota. And I looked in the notes in the cover, and he was right. And he asked me who wrote it, or who wrote it, who collected the language. And I told him, and he said it was a clergy person. And he said, oh my God, he said, I know that guy. And he said, that guy doesn't know anything. And so, and then this led to a whole conversation about clergy in the old days coming to our communities and collecting language and making these language materials and dictionaries. It's it's really layered, very complex, the history behind collecting our language, and it's very political, actually. And so what I learned is that the speakers in our community are our experts. They are the most reliable source for context and the wholeness, the completeness, as Simon Ortiz referred to it, of our language. And so that, it's in itself really changed me, changed a lot of my thinking. And so I'll admit there are times when I still look at dictionaries. We have quite a number of dictionaries and language materials. I still do look at them just because I'm a word nerd, as they say. But I don't rely on them at all anymore. And what I rely on is our speakers in our community. And that was a painful lesson. It's very embarrassing to publish a piece that has a big error like that in it. So, but it was a learning process, and I was really glad. And I had a beautiful conversation with my father. And so, in the end, if it wasn't for that mistake, I probably wouldn't have changed, or my thinking would have remained kind of static. So there you are. Thank you for that mistake. Um, Along the way, now we're moving on into further into my writing, out beyond undergrad. When I went to Bard College for grad school, and so there I was exposed to a lot of ideas, or things like conceptual poetry. Especially at that time, there was a lot of conversation about that mode of working. And so, yeah, I was exposed to a lot of that, and I started thinking. So that also began to influence my thinking. Just a quick kind of um, definition, if you will, from the Poetry Foundation. They say that conceptual poetry is non-referential and interested in the materiality of language. I'm not sure if it's always non-referential, but it is interested in the materiality of language. Conceptual poetry often relies on some organizing principle or information that is external to the text and can cross genres into visual or theoretical modes. And so I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with conceptual poetry. I'm sure many of you that are listening are here tonight. And one of the things we know about conceptual poetry sometimes is we don't even always have to read the whole poem, but it's more like the ideas that sort of form the piece. Now in the Q&A, you guys don't get too hard on me on this idea of conceptual poetry because I'm not an expert, but I know just enough. And I learned just enough to sort of expand my thinking. And I started thinking about this idea of decolonization. I found this really nice definition for decolonization from, you can see here, it says it's an online handbook called Pulling Together a Guide for Indigenization of Post-Secondary Institutions. And the way they defined it is decolonization is the process of deconstructing colonial ideologies of the superiority and privilege of Western thought and approaches. On the one hand, decolonization involves dismantling structures that perpetuate the status quo and addressing unbalanced power dynamics. On the other hand, decolonization involves valuing and revitalizing Indigenous knowledge and approaches and weeding out settler biases or assumptions that have impacted Indigenous ways of being. And then I continue on, this is me, oopsie, these are my words. So I'm saying, yet I'm never happy with the word decolonization because it centers the colonizer, just in the word itself, right? I accept, however, that it also visually indicates that decolonization is a matter of relationship. The colonizer at present is at the center of the word, right? Tribal nations and native people are often peripheral, diminished, absent, unheard, much like what we see in the word decolonize, right? So where's Lakota people in that word? So we're the colonizer is still at the center of this idea. So we wish to change this relationship. That's the goal. Furthermore, relationships have structures or organizing principles, right? Mother to father, child to mother, healer to patient, teacher to student, friend to friend, etc. We can step back and with a bird's eye view assess relationships and their organizing principles, much like we would view a document or text in conceptual poetry. So I started thinking in those terms, like, what is the structure? What is this organizing principle that I'm participating in when I use native language in an English dominant poem? So that's what I asked. What was I doing to the Lakota words in my pieces in relationship to English? What was I reinforcing or subverting? And how can I create reconciliation through language? So just out of curiosity, I decided to look visually, conceptually speaking. I decided to just look at the page of some of these poems and look at what was happening to Lakota language when I worked in the way I had been. And you can see, we have it here in the title, we have it here in one of the stanzas, Wachpanicha, sort of in this sea of English, surrounded by the sea. So we have Wachpanicha, Wachpanicha, Wachpanicha. And at the end, look at this, what I saw. I feel Wachpanicha. I feel alone. Can you imagine? When I looked at the page like this, I actually felt, I felt sorry for this word. It was alone. It was so lonely. It was so isolated. And it was just, and I was thinking visually, conceptually, what am I doing? What am I recreating? What kind of relationship am I recreating or reinforcing with English? If we go back to this idea that we are sort of aimed at, valuing and revitalizing Indigenous knowledge and approaches and weeding out settler assumptions and biases, right? So this was so revealing. It was really quite an exercise to do. I did the same with Blue Hole. Look at me. Look at this. Blue Hole, Lila Blue Hole, Blue Hole. I'm Lila Blue Hole. I'm tired. These little words are by themselves and they're really tired. They're trying to swim in this sea of English all by themselves, just surrounded, So that was, I don't know, I think a big step also in my journey. What I came to is I'm a learner in all of this, as a writer, as a poet, as a speaker, working with our language. I am a learner. And this is a really beautiful, I feel for me, a really beautiful place to be. And again, going back to the introduction to tonight's presentation, I think when I have this stance and view of myself, it allows for movement, a lot of movement, and it allows relationship. So you see, learner is to learn, and we are going to learn from others, right? Connection, relationship, once again. So I'm going to move into my most, my most recent sort of endeavor, working with Lakota language and poetics. And this was not just sitting down at the page by myself. Instead, I started to think, okay, just having a few words on the page for me. This is not a rule I'm applying to everyone. So please forgive me, any of my fellow friends and writers here who work with native language or heritage language on the page. This is not a rule that I'm putting out there for everyone to follow. But it was for me that I started to think about the way that I was isolating our language on the page. And I really wanted to ask more of myself and give our language a little more. Give them their own place, right? Their own space, and so on. And so, but I couldn't do that alone. I can't do that by myself using a dictionary, right? We already learned from that failure. So I decided to reach out and work with one of my aunts, my Auntie Tilda St. Pierre. And what we did is we made a workshop to teach other young people in our community on Pine Ridge Lakota language, a Lakota language and poetry class. So we co-taught this class together. And again, this is really fun. This is what really is the reward of all of this work, like the conversations I've had with my father, even teaching with my auntie, that I'm learning, but I'm also strengthening those relationships with others, you know, in my family, in a community. So that's the biggest reward out of all of this. This is, I hope my family will forgive me. I didn't ask their permission to put their photo here, but this is Auntie Tilda. This is my Aunt Tilda St. Pierre. These are all my nieces. This is Dawn and Faith and Loretta. This is my kid, Chance. This is my granddaughter, Sissy or Alyssa. So they all came to the language class, which was pretty exciting. And also there were other students not pictured, but it meant a lot to have us all together. So the point of this class, because I'm a learner, so I was teaching, but I was also learning from my aunt at the same time. The point of this class was, I think, to impress upon all the students that they did not have to be fluent in our language to make something beautiful. So we started off the class. I talked to them a bit about the idea of constraints, and so in the fact that as artists, no matter what medium you're working in, whether you're working with language or you're a painter or what have you, we all have constraints. Some of them are imposed upon us. Some of the constraints we have are things we can't help. Some of those constraints are also can be self-imposed. But as I explained to them, I said, you know, a good example is like if you're a painter, right? And you go to, and you have $50 and you go to the art store, you know, you can't buy the whole store, right? So you only have so much money and you can only buy maybe a few tubes of paint and maybe a paintbrush if you're lucky. But if you know how to use those tubes of paint, you can make incredible combinations. You can still make something very beautiful, right? So this is how we opened up the class. And so Auntie Tilda led the first part of the class. And what she did was she taught us 4 statements, how to say 4 sentences. The constraints are they were all present tense and they were all first person. She taught us how to say, I have something, and I asked the students to finish the sentence with a body part, like I have 2 hands, or I have a broken tooth, something like that. The second one she taught us was I do not have. And then we asked them to finish the sentence with an object or a clothing or tools. So for example, I do not have a pen, or I do not have a lamp, something like that, right? The third one is I want. She taught us how to say, I want something. And in this term, we asked them to fill it in with abstract terms, specifically like virtues or values from our culture, like I want courage, or I want generosity, or something like that. And the last sentence was I carry. So, and then they had to complete that with a natural element, an animal, or a plant. So you could have I carry grass, or I carry a porcupine, and so on. So they had their dictionaries at hand, or some of them were texting family members. They too were relying on speakers, not the dictionary. My nieces were texting their mom, asking for vocabulary. And then lastly, Auntie helped us with conjunctions. As I said, the goal was for each student there to leave with a poem written 100% in Lakota language, which for a lot of learners feels like something you have to wait for years to do before you can write a poem. You know, you have to study and become, you know, semi-fluent or what have you. And so this was really to show themselves, and for me to show myself too, that it was quite possible for us to use these constraints and still make something poetic, right? Use our language in that way. So I'm going to close with this poem that I wrote from the class in our language. And I want to apologize to any friends here who are Lakota speakers, because my pronunciation is not always the best. But I'm gonna give it my best try. But even if my pronunciation isn't the best, you can see it here on the page. So here we go. Let's see. Wakwala wachi iya wa aloak sohe. Wakan wachi gunugunushka aloak sohe. Wawapiska na milam pre bluhashni eash napsake shapshapa bluha. Wo ohitike wachi eash ishta washake bluhashni. Which oye bluhashni. Chunkshila wahinkpe bluha. Wana lehan. Wakpa aloak sohe. Eyash maniyat ke bluhashni. Machpiya aloak sohe. Eyash chanwakshicha. That word, it gets me. Chanwakshicha bluhashni. I want peace. I carry a stone. I want the unknown. I carry a grasshopper. I do not have white paper or a sharp knife, but I have dirty fingernails. I want courage, but I have a weak eye. I do not have the vocabulary. I have a toy arrow. Now I carry a river, but I do not have a cup. I carry the sky, but I do not have a bowl. And so I'm going to conclude there with the PowerPoint. And I want to say that in the end of this sort of journey, or what I would call growth, in the end, I think in some ways I realize I'm kind of a baby. I'm back at the beginning. I feel like a beginner, but that's a good place to be, you know? And so I think that things will move forward and change and progress, you know, in its own cycle, this new cycle that I'm entering into now. So and certainly one last thing before we enter into Q&A is I do really again want to emphasize that there's space for so many approaches in using our heritage language. So I'm certainly, I just welcome anybody's perspective and ways of working if they have anything to share as well. So I'm going to end there and maybe we can all talk and discuss things and yeah.
Oh my, Layli, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful and such a deeply generous talk. I'm thinking so much about the sort of the great generosity of vulnerability to share your learning journey with us in this way that allows us to also be learning with you, and then putting this learning into this relation that we're all in now tonight. And also how different that is from like the frame of a lecture that's more like the writer of the dictionary coming as this expert, but instead coming from this place of a different kind of vulnerability and care. So I just want to say a profound thank you. That was just so rewarding to get to be here for. And I would love to remind everyone to be putting your questions, sending them directly to Roberta. We'll get to as many of them as possible. And while those start coming in, I do have a question that actually feels super related to some of what you were ending with the idea of being a beginner or being in this cycle. I felt really interested in how you framed it to get us started with the idea of like, it was a mistake, but at that time it was the best that I could do. And and I thought of it again when you had this idea of in the poem finding at the end a surprise. I thought of the difference then between or like how that makes us think about the relationship between failure and success. When like what's the difference between a surprise and setting out with an intention and achieving that intention, thinking about success as it is so often framed in a more like capitalist, settler, colonial way of progress or of, you know, achieving what you set out for. And I wondered if you could speak then about the sort of different temporality of failure as I feel you were approaching in so much of what you brought up tonight, if that makes sense.
Well, again, I mean, I think going back to what I said, I don't want to like repeat myself. So I'll try to expand on it a bit. But I think that's actually the beauty of poetry. It's the one form of writing I feel, I mean, poetry is not an essay and it's not an online article. And we do not have to have a thesis that we have to prove to be true in the end. And to validate, we enter, as poets, we enter into a space of not knowing, right? It's so beautiful. And I think I have, now I don't want to go crazy, okay? So be patient with me. But I think it's fascinating, you know, this process of being open to the unexpected in poetry, the unexpected, the surprising ending, the place that we did not know we would arrive at. The piece, for example, that began about being poor or poverty, and it ended up in a place about language, just being able to speak, have the words to, I mean, that I was not expecting that. But what I think is, I mean, and I think maybe in a way, so this is what I want to, I'm going to go out on a, I'm going to go out there for a minute. In some ways, I have always felt like prayer in that way, excuse me, not prayer, poetry is a form of prayer. Because we are relying on the unseen, right? Even imagination, what is that? We're just believing that imagination exists. I don't even know. It's unseen. And we sit down and we say, I'm gonna rely on my imagination. Well, that is a form of relying on an idea, right? But we trust, we believe in it. And so I think I think all of that too is part of the the learning process.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's really beautiful. And I'm going to turn it now to our audience with our first audience question from Mary Bordeaux. Mary, I'm unmuting you now.
Hi, Layli.
Hi, Mary. Mary's one of my good friends.
I was just thinking when you were talking about, or you were showing the visual of the Lakota word on the page kind of by itself, and how you described it as being lonely. And they're kind of alone. And I was just, as you were talking and thinking about your conversation about decolonization and how that like centers the colonizer. So I was just wondering about like kinship and this idea of having a relationship or being a good relative to the Lakota language as you're learning and growing, right, with because I'm also, a Lakota language learner. And you're much braver than I am with the language, and I appreciate that. But anyway, so I just wondered.
I read a whole poem in our language.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I know if I had any relatives listening, they were probably rolling their eyes, but anyway.
That's okay. We're all clapping. I was clapping here at my kitchen table. So I just wonder if you're like asking yourself, am I being a good relative to the Lakota language as you're going and using the language?
Oh, thank you so much, Mary. Like, seriously. I mean, that's amazing. That's like right. That is, I didn't actually say it because I was trying not to go way out there, but it's what I think and it's what I feel. And it is about relationship and kinship and what kind of relationship we have with our language. How are we treating it? And it was, it was fascinating to like put all the rest of that text in grayscale and to see our words and to feel like a sense of pity for them. Now, I want to be very careful in saying this because I know I have many friends and I can think of people who use their native languages on the page, and they're beautiful, beautiful pieces. Okay. And they are used with English on the page as well. So anything I say is not, it's with respect to our many ways of working. But the example I showed really was in the spirit of having that sense of kinship and care for our language as its own person, if you will, its own being. How do you treat someone that you love? How do you treat someone that you care about? And so, yeah, I appreciate that, Mary. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, you caught my wavelength over there.
Yeah. Thanks, Layli. That was really good. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you, Layli. That was a wonderful question and a really beautiful response to get to hear. The next question we have from the audience, I will be asking on their behalf, and I really want to apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Amarak Huey writes, among the threads I see in whereas are the relationships between the land, the body, and language. Could you comment on how that connects to your use of Lakota language amid the English?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it does go back to this idea I talked about of the speakers, our speakers being the most reliable source, and our speakers are there on our land, in the homeland, you know, and it's there you have to go to be surrounded by our language, to hear it on a daily basis, to have relatives who speak it on a daily basis, or you can be in the house and hear it, you know, hear people having conversations in our languages, but that is all connected to the land, you know, and so and so for me, it has also been important to be connected to our place of origin and to our community, our families, you know. Again, to sit here in Santa Fe completely separated, it is still possible to learn, but there's something about, you know, again, it goes back to that idea of relationship and land and origin, place of origin. I don't know if that answers the question sufficiently, but
I think that was beautiful. Thank you. The next person I'm going to turn it to is, apologies again if this is a mispronunciation, but Anja Kuipers or Kuipers. I'm asking you to unmute now. Anya, maybe.
Hi, this is Anya Kuipers. It's so great to chat with you, Layli. Sorry, I'm a little awkward on camera too, so if I speak a little quickly, I apologize. But I would love to hear more about other artists and other mediums who are working with heritage language that you've been interested by and inspired by lately.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Native writers who work with their language. Right away, I think instantly of Margaret Newton, who is a language teacher. She's involved with language revitalization. So she has pieces that are written entirely in her language. But almost many people like James Thomas Stevens that I quoted here. In that same essay, he refers to the work of Sherwin Bitsui, who you might check out. Also, I'm thinking quickly of my daughter's dad, Orlando White. I remember he has a piece or two in his books. Oh my Lord. Now I feel on the spot like I should be an anthology person. But oh, this is good. I tell you what, anthologies, that might help you as a beginning point. So let me get two of the most recent ones. Sorry, is it weird that I stepped away? Anyway, I'm right next to my bookshelf. So here's a really great one you could start with, okay? New Poets of Native Nations. Maybe you already have that. Oh, you have it. Look at you. Oh, good job. Cool. And then, of course, the one by our poet, edited by our poet laureate, Joy Harjo. When the light of the world was subdued, our songs came through. And so those are really great places to start. You can start, and then as you are exposed to some of those writers, I mean, then you can explore all of them further. Yeah.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you, Layli. How are you feeling, Layli, for questions? You want to do one or two more? Or this also was already amazing. So if I don't mean to.
Yeah, we can do one or two more. I want to turn on my lamp though. It feels like it's getting dark. Just 1 second.
Yeah, no, take your time.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, here we go. The next person who we'll hear from is Michael Wasson. Michael, I'm asking you to unmute. Michael?
Michael?
Oh, are we coming? Oh, here. Michael? Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Michael. Michael is my friend.
Yay.
Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for your talk today, Layli. I'm so glad to be able to wake up in the morning and hear you. So I love how you're able to build this class around your own poetics and journey with language. And I really loved everything you were talking about, failures, all this stuff that's very important for us as poets and stuff. But really my question is, what does it mean for you, like in your heart of hearts, to experiment and also grow with your language? Because I have a very similar journey. I feel a lot of failure and a lot of like success, but to be able to have this class, and it's like a very good reflection point, I feel. So if you could comment on that, that'd be amazing. And also, hello.
Hi. Okay, I'm sorry, Michael. Can you rephrase the question? Like, it's like, what failures?
Yeah, so basically it's like, what does it mean for you in your heart to grow with your language in this way through poetry?
You know, I think a lot of it is like, one of the things that is hardest for me as a writer is I feel like there's so much at stake. It's quite different than another medium. Let's say, if I'm a sculptor, or I'm working visually, it's a the sense of accountability is a little different. But every word we have on the page, we're accountable for. And so I think especially when it comes to using our languages, it's because of that responsibility that I am constantly going back. Like I said, I had that piece published. I could have just let it be, but I had a nagging feeling. And that feeling comes from that sense of responsibility. Because again, it's kind of like seeing the language as its own being. That's one way of thinking about it. And that sense of responsibility also to our community, you know, because I do have friends and family who are speakers and much more fluent than I am, and so on. And so, you know, there are many people that I feel, you know, like I have to do my very best. And so even if that means I have to go back and correct something that I've written, go back, double check it. Like I said in the piece, I called my dad to double check my findings, right? But once again, I do make errors. There are what I see as failures, and I tend to be very hard on myself. I heard that Virgos are like that, so I'm a Virgo, and I just like get all upset and like go over the details. But at the same time, those failures, as I tried to illustrate, lead to growth. They lead to really wonderful, kind of sometimes life-changing conversations. You know, I mean, I learned so much in trying to go back and trying to make sure I've done everything correctly and everything is just right. I've ended up growing. So that's how I see it. And that was really the point when I started off, is that to make, and even for the folks here that are not working with heritage languages, that's the specifics of tonight's talk, but the overriding, the umbrella the overriding theme here is the idea of compassion with ourselves as writers. There is so much we're accountable for, so much is at stake, but we also have to be also compassionate with ourselves, that we are growing and changing people too, And so, I mean, the nice side of this is I can share this with young people, young people themselves who are starting out with writing and learning our language and so on. I can tell them, hey, these are the mistakes I've made. And here you are, take them and you can use them and just do better, On that note, I do want to say also the language class that I presented at the end, my poem is pitiful compared to the students who were in their poems. I'm serious. And the last workshop we gave, it was online. My auntie gave an online, we co-taught online a few months ago with Racing Magpie. And the point is the students on the second day read their poems, and she got emotional, my aunt, and she said, I have never heard our language used in this way. So that was exciting because it was something for ourselves, but it was also something for our community. Like the fact that it moved one of our elders, to feel like, oh my God, this is what's possible for us. And yeah, that's exciting. So Michael, I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
Thank you, Michael, for that question. Thank you, Layli, for another incredibly beautiful answer. I'll turn it now to our last audience question for the evening from Michelle Murphy. Michelle, I am asking you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me? Great, thank you so much. This is incredible. I was so moved by your work and this lecture, the slippage and what can be learned by relationships to not perpetuate the toxicity of top-down ideologies. Are there things you do not want to translate or to describe by poetry or any words at all? What is unknowable?
I guess I have maybe two answers to that. Okay. One is like a very practical answer. There are certainly certain subjects that I do not write about, and I will not, out of respect and privacy to community or to family or what have you. So, and I feel like that is not always the case with all artists and writers. Some artists and writers are very bold and they don't have the same kind of boundaries, and they feel free as individuals to kind of explore whatever they need to or whatever they want to through their art, through their writing and poems and what have you. But I don't have the same thing. So there are certain subjects that I don't write about. And let's say maybe just a very simple example of one of the main ones is like, doings and certain practices in our community. So I don't like to go there. And there's other things, along those lines. The other thing though is the other way of answering that too is I think this is why I also work visually, because I think that some things are not translatable and there are not words for everything. And sometimes I need and I want to see something and to feel it, right? Like an example is because as a poet, I almost feel like I'm being disloyal to poetry. But I've said I don't feel like words are enough all the time. They just aren't. They're not enough for me. And I don't think that they serve as good vehicles for translation of experience, like Simon Ortiz talked about. It is a thing of perception and experience. And it's kind of like, for example, I always use this, like one of my favorite things is the grass. You guys know that from my book, right? I have grass all over in the book, etc. So I love it, especially when it's really high. And when you like go and you see a whole stretch of land with high grass, and then the wind comes and it ripples like that, right? And it's kind of silvery and green, you know, it's so beautiful. It's like waves, it's almost like water. That is my favorite thing in the world, but there are no words. There's just no words for that. You have to see it. And that's it. And that's why I say, I think I have a piece in Dakota 38 where I said real poems do not really require words. It's true. You just can't do everything in the poem. At least me. And I feel so disloyal. Here we are at the Poetry Project saying poems are not enough, but I do my best. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Layli. We will accept the possibility that poems might not always be enough. But no, truly, I feel so grateful for tonight. I feel so rich in language. I feel so glad to have had this opportunity to think together. And thank you all so much for being here. We'll turn on the public chat, so please feel free to share your thanks and your praise to Layli for all of this amazing thinking and sharing that she's done with us. We will put Lucinda Williams back on. If you want to hang out for a little while and chat, you're welcome to, and we'd really love to see you all again at another Poetry Project event soon.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.